The Form.IO roles and permission system is a feature within the Form.IO platform that facilitates the management of user access and functionality of a form submission data, and even the Form.IO project itself. In this video, users will be assigned various roles. These roles will be mapped to different form permissions. The different users will then authenticate to show how the different permissions behave within the context of an application. Before the roles and permission system can be utilized, an authentication method must first be established, which will dictate how a user is authenticated and assigned their role. This example is using the SAML authentication method, which will call upon a SAML provider to authenticate the user. Once the user has authenticated, the SAML role will then be mapped to a Form.IO role. Looking deeper into this authentication method, the Form.IO login form embedded within my application has been configured to support SAML authentication. My SAML provider has been successfully integrated to my Form.IO project, and my SAML group roles have been mapped to my Form.IO roles. Click the documentation link within the description of this video for more information on the various authentication method types using the Form.IO platform. Again, these roles here are assigned to users during the authentication process. These roles itself are managed within the Access tab within the left-hand navigation bar of your project. Here you can create new roles, modify existing ones, or delete roles as you see fit. There are 4 default roles that come with every project: Administrator, Anonymous, Authenticated, and Everyone. For this demo, we are going to be using the default roles Administrator, Anonymous, and Authenticated for the demo. These roles will be mapped to permissions, which grant access control on who can perform certain functions based on the role that user has been assigned. These permissions have different types based on CRUD operations, create, read, update, delete, and index, and can be defined within certain scope levels of a project. There are 3 different scope levels that define the permissions. The project scope, which can be found within the Access tab of a project. These permissions govern actions like viewing a list of the project's forms and resources, updating project settings, or importing and exporting the project JSON. The next 2 scopes, Form Scope and Submission Scope, can be configured within the Access tab of a specific form or resource. The Form Scope, which is configured within the Form Definition Access, govern actions like the ability to view a form within an application, updating the form's JSON, or deleting a form from the project. The Submission Data Scope defines the user permissions for the underlying submission data of a given form or resource. These permissions govern actions like the ability to submit the form or the ability to view, update, or delete the form submission data within the application. Now that we've defined all of the permission scopes, let's take a look at assigning different permission types to the form and submission scope first. I have a job application form embedded within my application. For the first scenario, I want to configure the permissions to allow for anonymous users the ability to access the form and submit the application. Right now, I do not have any access permissions set up for my form. And when I view the form within my application, I am refused access and redirected to the authentication page. So let's set this form up for anonymous access. Again, we're going to click the Access tab of our form, and we're going to scroll down to the Form Definition Access section. The Read Form Definition permission dictates who can view the form. So we're going to click the Select Role dropdown and select Anonymous from the role list. The anonymous role is a special role within the project that cannot be deleted and is reserved for unauthenticated users that need permissions to view or interact with the form. So let's save our settings. All right, let's go back to our app. I now have access to the application. or the form even though I'm not authenticated. I can view the form, however, this blue submit button is disabled and I'm unable to submit the form. So let's go back to our access settings of the form and look at the submission data permissions, which govern all of the CRUD operations for the submission data functionality of the form. And we're going to add the anonymous role to the create own permission, which will allow anyone with the given role to create their own submission against the form. A quick overview of the own and all permission types. The own permissions relate to permissions reserved for the owner of the submission. The all permission grants the access rights to all submissions that have been made against the form, regardless of who owns them or who has submitted them. So we're going to save our setting, go back to our application, refresh. I can now see the submit button is blue and I'm able to fill out this form and submit it. Alright, that's how you set up a form for anonymous submissions. Let's modify the access permissions of our application form so only authenticated users can view and submit the form. So we're back in our project in the access settings of our job application form. And now we're going to remove the anonymous role from the create own submission and replace that with authenticated. Same with the read form definition. Remove anonymous, select authenticated. So this means I'll need to log into my application with a user that carries the authenticated role in order to view the form and make a submission. So if we go back to our application, refresh it, you'll notice that we can no longer view the application form and instead are presented with the login form. So I'm going to click my login with SAML button. As a reminder, I am obviously using SAML as my authentication method. If we go to our SAML settings, we can see here that any SAML user that is part of the SAML group member will carry the authenticated role when they authenticate, and any SAML user that is part of the admin group will carry the Form.IO administrator role when they log in. So this user joe@example.com is part of the member group of my SAML provider, so they should receive the authenticated role once they authenticate. All right, we have access to the app. I can actually inspect my dev console and look at my user object to double check the role mapping. So here I am part of the member group of my SAML provider, and I have been assigned this role ID. I can double check this role ID within my project. So if I go to the Access tab and open the authenticated role, I can see this ID within my project, and I can see those IDs match between the authenticated role here and the user object within my app. So I am indeed authenticated. And we can go back here and make a submission. After making the submission, I'm redirected to the view page of the submission. However, I can't see the data. The reason these fields are blank is because our authenticated users do not have permission yet to view their own data. So let's navigate back to the access settings of my form. And we're going to add the authenticated role to the read-own submission permission. And if I do a quick refresh, I am now able to see my submission data from my authenticated user. If I want, I can add even more permissions to this form for authenticated users. So I can go to this update own, add authenticated. Now when I go to refresh my app, I have this new edit tab and I'm able to update my submission. And if I wanted, I could also add the delete on, which would allow me to delete my own submission if that was set. So let's take a look at the JSON of this form and get an understanding of how the permission scope works in conjunction with the JSON structure. So here I'm in Postman and I've done a GET request against my form, so I'm able to read the JSON. And we're just going to look at the form scope, which we can see on line 9. It has the read all permission set. This is actually the ID for the authenticated role. And then below that we have the submission access scope. And we can see the authenticated role ID is set for create own, read own, and update own, just like we have in the UI of our access tab. All right, let's set up some permissions for an admin type user to manage all of the submission data against this form. So within my access tab, I'm actually going to add the administrator role for all of the all submission permissions. So create all, read all, update all, and delete all. And real quick, we can do a quick update on our form JSON to see the updated scopes with the addition of the administrator role. And let's look at the data tab of our job application form. We can see that we have two different submissions, one from our anonymous user at the beginning and a second from our authenticated user. Let's go back to our application. We're going to log out. And now we're going to log in with our administrative user. All right, I'm now logged in as my admin. If I go to the submission tab, I can see both the anonymous submission and authenticated submission. I'm able to view any of these submissions, make updates, or delete the submission if I want. So that's a basic overview of how the roles and permission system works. Be sure to review our help documentation for more details on these systems, like project level permissions, group permissions, field-based submission permissions, and more. Thanks for watching.